Presentation. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Apologies for any of the confusion over the start time. Our start time was 11, but I appreciate you got emails a little bit earlier. So thank you all for being patient and grabbing a cuppa. We're really excited about today's session because I think probably one of the things as a regional coordinator I get asked about most is awards and how we offer awards and how we work with organizations to equip them to apply for awards. So today will be a really hopefully an informative session for all of you to understand sort of the evolution of the award process and how we can support you with it. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Sarah Truitt. I am the regional coordinator for Yorkshire and Humberside and the Northeast. And I also support some of our streams work. Colleen, who is my colleague and is our communications manager and waving, as you can probably see, we'll be kind of doing the presentation together and transitioning back and forth through the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know some of you have waited a while. I'd be grateful to ask if folks could put themselves on mute when we're listening. We do have the chat function up, so please add in any kinds of questions or comments that you have along the way. And then we have two sort of designated breaks in the presentation today where we'll look at those and we can have kind of a little bit of a plenary discussion. But hopefully this will be a sort of starting point, and obviously going forward, if you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me. I'll put my contact details in the chat as well as your sort of relevant regional coordinator. So without further ado, I'm going to start and sharing my screen. So just bear with me 1 second. And hopefully you all can see that. It's affirmative, I'm assuming. It's all nice and quiet. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm just going to quickly kind of just review what the objectives are for today's presentation. And so what we wanted to do is kind of provide just an overview of the City of Sanctuary Award process. We know some groups do a lot of awards and have been really engaged and active in working with streams and awarding local organizations. Other groups perhaps not. And I haven't seen all the registrations. I'm hoping that there may be some organizations that are just keen to learn more in preparation of maybe presenting an award. We also felt like it was really important to talk about how awards have evolved over time and how we think of it as sort of a strategic tool for our theory of change. And we're going to kind of dive into a little bit more detail about the learn, embed, and share processes and why we've created this model and what we kind of expect to see around those three elements of an award. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the appraisal panel process, how you put one together, what a panel should be looking for, how you kind of assess evidence, and then generally just answer questions as we go along. So hopefully that's clear enough, and that will get us started for this. Okay, just to kind of provide a quick overview, I expect and hope that most of you are pretty familiar with who we are at City of Sanctuary, but just in case some of you may be joining us as sort of external agency organizations that are seeking to get an award, we just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork and explain that we are a UK-wide network, and our aim is to build a movement to support welcome and belonging in communities. So we're a network of about 115 groups, all committed to creating a culture of welcome and safety, especially for people who have sought sanctuary here from fleeing war, persecution. We see the UK as a place of welcome, and we want to make sure all of our communities develop to create cultures of welcome. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Colleen to talk a little bit about our values.
I'm hoping that everybody's familiar with our values, and we've just thrown this slide in really to remind everybody of our values, which we would obviously expect any awarded organisation to also embrace, because the values underpin, all of the work that we do, and underpins the award process. So just to quickly sort of remind people, around, integrity is about the high standards. So we're seeking high standards in the award process, but it is about inclusiveness, people participating and being open. So we're collaborating with our awarded organisations, and we're not trying to pretend that we are more expert in their professional practice than they are. Clearly they are the experts. You know, expert teachers, expert university practitioners or librarians. So, you know, we approach the whole of the awards process in that spirit of openness. And the value of inspiration is really key, because the awards work and all of our streams work is about spreading that best practice and inspiring others to join that movement for welcome and to embrace people seeking sanctuary, include them in their activities and celebrate and honour, you know, their contribution. I think that'll probably cover that there. Questions later. Just a quick background, streams really evolved organically. So Yorkshire and Humberside started with schools and maternity streams. And really it kind of, you know, the important thing to remember is that it has evolved in a grassroots way. And it was only about 3 years ago that we appreciated that awards were being delivered in a very much of an ad hoc way, and in different ways. So a school in one region might be given the award for different reasons to a school in another region. And what was important to us was to maintain the credibility and the robustness of the awards. We didn't want to lose that credibility, which is why we began at a UK-wide level to develop a strategy, which I'll go on into in a moment. And that was done through considerable consultation and a sort of widespread analysis of where awards work and streams work was happening, and taking into account and respecting, you know, the history of how it evolved. But we did recognise that awards and streams work was incredibly important strategically, because we were bringing the mainstream. It was a really important contribution to building the movement for welcome, involving mainstream organisations. And it was important, you know, that we began to sort of, although we still maintain the grassroots value of it all, that we needed to be more consistent and maintain its credibility by thinking about it sort of like across the whole of the UK. So we're going to the next slide, which I think is an effort to provide visually, you know, all aspects of the strategy document, which I will send to anybody who wants, but it's a very long paper. And we did consult with the network, and we wrote that about 3 years ago. So essentially at the bottom there are steering groups. This is a sort of generic model, you know, and obviously each stream has evolved differently and may look differently. But the ideal was that each stream would be led by steering groups, which would be made up of, you know, people from the network, including somebody seeking sanctuary, and our partners and other stakeholders, particularly expert practitioners. And those steering groups would inform and advise and support local groups and regions. And clearly partners and practitioners were key to that. So in many of our steering groups, we have national level partners. So for example, our libraries of the Sanctuary stream and the awards work that we have evolved have been in partnership with the Libraries Connected, which is the national body for chief librarians. So they have been part and parcel of that process of developing libraries of sanctuary, which of course was a grassroots beginning with Thimble Mill Library, which was actually in an area where we don't have a group. So it shows again how important this strategy is, because it goes much wider than our network of over 100 groups. I won't talk about all the other things because you can read that for yourself, but those are obviously all the other factors that are taken into account, you know, in those circles, that's sort of overlapping across all of the work. So I think we can move on. And I'm not going to talk too much to this slide, but we thought it was important to put this in again as a sort of background. We will have a session on our theory of change and consult the network, because we see it does need to develop. But essentially, it's based on contact theory. If you bring people together with people seeking sanctuary, it does help to break down fears and prejudices, and connecting people up is a very, very powerful way of engaging people in that movement for welcome and building that passion for welcome as people develop empathy and understanding by knowing people who seek sanctuary. So you can see on the left side, that's very much our contact theory with the micro level examples. So a teacher or librarian meet somebody seeking sanctuary through their work, and they become inspired to involve themselves in advocacy work because they can see how wrong the system is and how badly people seeking asylum are actually treated. On the right side of that is the macro level, and that's really, you know, our partnership work and our streams work, because we're about building a wider movement. We are not the movement. The movement's much bigger than City of Sanctuary, but we make a very key contribution to that movement building, and part of that contribution comes from our awards and streams work, where we are engaging not the refugee sector, not even necessarily the voluntary sector, but we're going to professional practitioners across the mainstream, and we're involving them in building welcome and inclusion. Thank you. Next slide.
And I think this is where I take back over for a little bit.
Okay.
So one of the first steps for any organization that wants to become an awarded organization is that we ask them to sign up an organizational pledge. And this is to kind of affirm that they've recognized the principles and some of the values that we referenced earlier in our presentation, and that they understand that in working in collaboration with us, that we expect them to be working to promote welcome, have an ethos of openness and participation, and that they understand those aims. While we think it's important for those organizations to know our values and what we're about as an organization, it's also for us a tool and a means for us to help build the movement. I will just kind of give an example from my perspective. You know, obviously we're not a campaigning organization, but we do try and support ongoing campaigns to improve the situation of asylum seekers and refugees in the UK. But part of what we're doing in building up networks of awarded institutions is to try and to be able to say to policymakers that we're trying to influence, is to say, you know, in Yorkshire, for example, we have 13 schools of sanctuary. We have 2 cathedrals of sanctuary. We have, you know, we're building up this network of mainstream organizations that are supporting what we do. So I think that's part of what the organizational pledges do. And it's an easy way, I think, for an organization to kind of review whether their values are in line with ours and whether they actually really want to go through the process of applying for an award. So the overall process, we've kind of referenced a couple of times, and you may be familiar with, but we kind of see it breaking down into 3 main processes that an institution has to go through. The first being that they need to learn about what it means to seek sanctuary. And that can take place in many different ways for an organization, but quite simply, it's to kind of give organizations an opportunity to find out why people seek sanctuary. Why do they come to the UK? What does it mean in a global context? And what is the experience that people who are seeking sanctuary in the UK have here, and understand that the challenges they face. Having gotten that knowledge, having learned about what that means, we ask them then to look at their own practices, their policies. How can they make changes to the way that they work to embed a culture of welcome and safety? How can they make sure that, you know, if they are working with people seeking sanctuary, how have they created mechanisms to make it open, easy? Are they looking at, you know, different language provision? All of those sorts of things to say that, you know, it's not just that they know what the situation is for people seeking sanctuary in the UK, but also that they're finding ways to try and address and make it easier for them to engage with their institution. And then the sort of third and final point is that goes a little bit to our vision about movement building, and that's about sharing what they do, not just, you know, within their own institution, but beyond. We're asking organizations, when they get awarded, to really celebrate that fact in their community, because it's, you know, one of the main aims of us here at City of Sanctuary is that we want not just for those of us who work to support refugees and asylum seekers, but also the wider community understand that there is a sense of welcome. So it's really important to do that media outreach. We feel it's important to, look at local, engage local officials, media, and share what people have done in order to become an awarded institution. So I think, Colleen, you're going to kind of, this is going to be sort of this section is just a little bit about, we're going to kind of dive down into some of the criteria issues around each of the learn, embed, share. We have, as Colleen's mentioned, some of our streams have evolved over time, and we have created specific criteria for those. So for example, schools, universities, further education colleges, libraries, museums, all of those, we've created a very specific set of criteria to help us navigate and award an institution. But we do have a generic set for those organizations that don't yet have defined criteria. And we're always in the process of developing these criteria. As Colleen mentioned a few years ago, when we started really looking at this and noticing that awards were being given out in slightly different ways, it was felt that, developing criteria would help give it a level of credibility and robustness. And so the process by which we've done that is we've done consultations with groups. Some of you will know, particularly from the school streams, we've brought people together to talk about, okay, what is feasible? What is a criteria that walks the line with being significant enough that it's meaningful, but at the same time isn't so onerous that it puts schools off. So this is just a little bit, some of the schools where we have streams criteria. And just to say that many of those criteria that have been developed, we've created resource packs like this that outline those criteria in much greater detail. So it should hopefully be pretty straightforward for you to think through how you can work with an institution. And I think I'm going to pass back to Colleen now.
Hi, and yes, just to remind everybody, we will be emailing the PowerPoint presentation to you, and the slides will be available on the website afterwards as well. So as Sarah said, interestingly, the criteria as we evolved through consultation and based on experience and based on what was actually already happening in the network, which we negotiated through the steering groups and those consultation meetings, were reflecting our principles, which of course is the most obvious place to start. So we've drawn up a generic set of criteria to be interpreted in any context if that stream isn't developed enough. So if you were to get an application, for example, from a cafe or a mother and toddler group or any organisation where we don't have resources developed as a specific stream, you can apply these criteria and interpret them within the context. The other thing to remember is that when you award an organisation, that award reflects the size and complexity and the context of that organisation. So obviously you would be applying these criteria differently to a large business or a hospital than you would to a small voluntary group that wants to engage and include and work with people seeking sanctuary and be awarded for that work. So our first principle is offering a vision of a culture of welcome and inclusion. And so these are the two main criteria that we would expect from most organisations. If there's no public commitment through, their pledge, appearing on the website as a supporting organisation and making, perhaps this public commitment visible on their website, that would be really key and an important part of the spirit of openness and our values, in terms of celebrating somebody with an award. Also, any organisation would need to have somebody in post who's, and it's very clear to members of the public that they are a contact point, for anybody with any queries. This particular point, that second criteria, came out of our work with universities, where it was very important for sanctuary scholars whose experience, which they were sharing with us, was that, in some universities that had great scholarship schemes, but actually scholars were left struggling because they were passed from pillar to post. There was no one single point where all of their issues could be supported and addressed. So, and that's where that came out. So we can go on to the next one. Those are the basic principles. And then next slide, please. The next principle is the key one under the learn process. It's really a whole organisation approach to learning, and this is about awareness raising across a whole organisation, which obviously is going to be much more of a challenge, for example, across a university or even a school, than it might be in a small community library where there might only be, you know, half a dozen staff and some volunteers. The important thing there about that principle as well is using people seeking sanctuary as part of their learning. I don't mean using, that doesn't sound right, forgive me. If people learn directly from people seeking sanctuary, it is much more powerful, and it underpins our theory of change and supports our principles around empowering people seeking a sanctuary and engaging them in decision making and in involvement. So any organisation, if they're not talking to people seeking sanctuary, then they don't know they're getting it right within their context. So that would be a really important principle there. Sorry, I thought you'd move to the next slide, which I do want you to do, Sarah. Thank you very much. You know, and I've already started on that. You know, obviously, wherever possible, people seeking sanctuary need to be involved. And it may be even at university level where they have 3-year strategic plans, they should be engaging sanctuary scholars, you know, in at least involving them to some extent to influence the development of those plans. And another important criteria in terms of embedding is around creating those opportunities. That principle of opportunities for friendship and solidarity is the key principle behind our theory of change. If we don't bring people together, then we can't expect to grow the movement. We can't expect to break down barriers. So an example might be in a library setting where librarians organise activities for the community. If those activities engage people seeking sanctuary, as well as, say, for example, you know, mother and toddler story time between mothers in the local community from the host community, as well as mothers from the asylum seeking community, sharing story time together. That is a beautiful example, really, of our contact theory. Clearly, any organisation with an award will be reaching out to people seeking sanctuary through refugee support networks. So there are areas where there isn't a City of Sanctuary group, but there may be an amnesty group, or there may be a refugee action or refugee council, or action welcoming refugee organisation, or other voluntary organisations who are working with refugees in some context or other. We would expect an award organisation to be reaching out and involving those other organisations in the work that they do. So moving on to the share process, this is the most exciting bit, I think, about the awards process and the whole stream strategy, because we're asking organisations to share their good practice with others, and to celebrate and promote welcome and contribution of people seeking sanctuary. And what better way to grow the movement, raise awareness and build upon that? It's actually quite exponential. So you get one school of sanctuary in a city, and as part of the award process, you need to tell other schools of sanctuary what they're doing. And so they're recruiting more schools into that movement for sanctuary. And as you get more schools, so you know, the network is cast wider, and it's that exponential potential is very, very exciting. And we can see that in some cities, but it's not happening everywhere. But we know its potential, and that's why we're very excited by this. If I could just quickly share at this point, when we first became involved in awards processes, and there was a paper 7-8 years ago which came out from trustees in City of Sanctuary around awards work. Personally, I thought, who are we to judge? You know, we're not a judging organisation. We're not an Ofsted. We don't want to be, you know, who are we to make these judgments? I don't think that's a very good idea at all. But very quickly, I changed my mind because of this strategic potential and recognising that people want to be recognised for the good work they do. They want to be able to share it, and they're looking to us for this process. So it would be very remiss if we hadn't sort of responded to this fabulous opportunity. I think we might be going over to you now, Sarah.
Yeah. So hi, I'm just going to be outlining a little bit some of the steps that is sort of frame the process of getting an award. And I should say, this is sort of a generic model, and we recognize that some institutions will have worked with City of Sanctuary for a long time and then decide to apply for award. Some of them have been doing a lot of work that's relevant and sort of just quite simply need to fill in documentation to be recognized for it. But generally, we say this is kind of the process or the steps, and that's usually that. If an organization is interested in becoming awarded, we ask that they look for their local City of Sanctuary group. We do have a wide network of groups across the UK, and so there's lots of people who are working on the ground who can help with that. We also recognize that in some places, quite simply, there might not be an active group or a group that really has the capacity or the interest to be able to respond and work with every institution that might want to get involved. So we do have regional coordinators, and I'll make sure to pop in the chat the different names of regional coordinators. That we have a few on the call, so hopefully they can also identify themselves. We always ask that people kind of spend a little bit of time on our website, because our website outlines for each of the streams, has quite a bit of resources. And if there are criteria for that stream, so for example, if you go to the school's website, it kind of clarifies, here are the specific criteria, here's what we would expect you to do, along with a whole range of resources to help them be able to achieve the criteria, including, where they can go find training resources, examples of what embedding looks like in a particular context, i.e., if they are a health trust or a school, what it may look like to embed. So we have quite a bit of information on our website. We have, as I mentioned, and I'll hold it up again, these resource packs, which provide a lot of good inspiration, case studies, and examples. So we always direct people to spend a bit of time reviewing those documents. I referenced it earlier, but one of the key first steps would be to sign an organizational pledge. Make sure that, having read our charter, an organization feels that they are in line with our values and want to go through with this process. And then we always suggest that an organization kind of does an audit process. They look at what have they done so far. Sometimes we have organizations that come to us just saying, we've just learned about this. This is really interesting. We want to get involved. Where do we begin? And they may or have very little knowledge of or exposure to the asylum process here in the UK. Or why people become refugees. And so in those instances, we direct them to, local organizations that might be able to help them, websites, trainings, things like that. Other organizations come to us saying, hey, we've been working with our local partner for a long time. We have a lot of capability, we know. And so they kind of have quite a bit of body of evidence built up already, and so that audit process just kind of helps them figure out, okay, what have we done for learn, what have we done to really embed this, and what have we done to share it. And then we sort of recommend, having done that audit, developing an action plan. If an organization has done quite a bit of learning and has a lot of that information, but hasn't really figured out a way to embed those processes, that's where the action plan can come into effect. And all of these, we recommend that they aren't done sort of in isolation either, by an institution, but hopefully in collaboration and partnership with a local City of Sanctuary group. And again, if there isn't one there, then we can always those of us who work for the City of Sanctuary UK team would always be working with you to try and support organizations. Bless you. Now, can I ask for folks to put themselves on mute? Thanks. Sort of the next step as part of that process is to start to document what folks, what has been done in an organization. So we have documents on our website. We have an application on form. I will pop in the website for the awards where you can download some of these templates. But this is where we ask organizations to try and develop the evidence base for it. We have a couple ways that organizations can submit that application. We have a Word document that can be filled out. We also have an online process through our database. Both are, acceptable means to do it. We know some organizations find it easier just to fill in a form, or as they start the journey, they begin to document and continue to update that document as they go along. Other organizations prefer to gather all their evidence and then wait till they have enough information and do it online. Sort of one plea as someone who, as a regional coordinator, we always ask both our groups and institutions is to make sure when you're going through this award process that you share those applications with us on the national team, to make sure that we can save that information in our database. So if instead of applying online, you do a Word document, please try and make sure that we have it on at the central team. And there's a couple reasons for that, principally because we want to make sure that we have really accurate idea of how many awarded institutions there are across the UK, but also to help connect and link organizations to each other and make sure that organizations are all being involved in any activities or updates or events that we're having around the specific streams. So once an application has come in, then either the local group or with some support from us on the national team, we'll set up an assessment panel and process. We'll get a little bit into kind of what that looks like in a minute when we talk about the assessment panel. But that's generally a group of 3, 4, 5 people who will review an application, kind of see what the application, how it matches the criteria for a particular stream or the generic criteria, and sort of come to a conclusion. And then in that process, we always provide feedback. We try and, if there's particularly great examples of best practice, we then try and share that across the network, either through our newsletter or on our website, including in case studies, that sort of thing. Once an organization has been awarded, we always try and encourage there to be some sort of award recognition ceremony, a celebration, and the final process, that maintain element, is that we hope and expect that organizations kind of continue a commitment beyond the award. We hope that we sort of see the award as not necessarily the end of a process, but actually the beginning of a continued partnership that goes forward into the future. So I realize we've talked a long time right now. We do have a couple more slides where we go into a little bit more depth about this appraisal team and how we pull that together and looking at types of evidence. But I'm mindful that folks have had, we've had quite a bit of me talking to you, so it might be helpful if I'll stop sharing for a minute and take a look at the chat and maybe just allow people to put their hands up for questions at this moment. So I'm going to stop sharing and see faces again, because it's always slightly bizarre to speak into a PowerPoint and you wonder if anyone's there. So oh, Colleen, maybe you've had a...
Well, I just thought I might mention some of the questions, some of which came to me directly, whilst people think about any further questions and put their hands up. And Sarah, if you just make a note of anybody who wants to come in next, so you can bring them in. Somebody asked, if there wasn't anybody seeking sanctuary in the school, could that school then not become a school of sanctuary? And my reply to that is, of course, any school can become a school of sanctuary. They don't need to have refugee children in the school in order to do so. But there are ways that school could reach out. So I know there are schools in Ripon, for example, that have invited speakers from Leeds to come into their schools to talk about the experience of seeking sanctuary. There is a school in Matlock that sent a small group of children down to the Derby Refugee Advice Centre, where they met people seeking sanctuary and got to know them, and then they invited them to visit them in the school to introduce them to other children. There's also a school on the South Coast that was a private all-girls school, and one of the suggestions we made to them, if they wanted to be a school of sanctuary, was why didn't they think about providing a scholarship to an asylum-seeking girl and give them that opportunity. So there are lots of ways that any organisation that maybe doesn't have members directly as part of their organisation, that they could still be reaching out and learning from. The other question was about, if you've got no local group, how does an organisation get an award, or are organisations awarded without involving a local group? Now, I'll just give you the quick story about Thimble Mill. They came to my attention through Bearwood Action for Refugees. There was no local group, but the nearest group was Birmingham. So we involved Birmingham in the award appraisal, and in fact the Birmingham group were integral to feeding in our thinking in terms of developing a strategy for a library stream of sanctuary. but the appraisal involved Bearwood Action for Refugees, who aren't part of us. And interestingly, since then, between the library and Bearwood, we now have a Sandwell Borough of Sanctuary group. So anybody could contact us. It's one of the pressures we feel in the national team is that we may get asked to appraise and award organisations where we don't have a nearby national group to help. And we need to find the capacity to be able to appropriately respond to that. We had a school in London who, having become a school of sanctuary, can then be involved in further appraisals of other local schools. And of course, we're now growing boroughs of sanctuary in London, so that capacity issue is now being addressed. And lastly, supporting organisations. There's been questions about how do we know if people have pledged. To see organisations that have pledged nationally, it is on the website under supporting organisations, and you find that on the Get Involved page, which is on the menu. Locally, you would know who's pledged to you. And I just wanted to remind everybody that if you want your supporting organisations to appear automatically on your website, talk to the wonderful Nawal, who will help you embed a Google form so that anybody who comes across your website and thinks, oh, I support Leicester City of Sanctuary, I'd like to pledge support to them, they can complete that form and then automatically appear as an awarded organisation on their supporting organisation website. So that technology is there on the website, so use it.
Can I just, before we move on, ask the question? I mean, does a new organization that is pledging support, do they have to, I know the answer, but I just want for everybody to hear that. Do they need to sign both a local pledge and ideally also a national pledge?
I would say yes, ideally, and that hasn't been happening, but we'd like to encourage more of that happening. So if you look at the supporting organisations at national level, there's not many, but they are widespread. So, you know, in terms of the diversity of the organisations who are signing up. But we would encourage all local groups to say, well, sign the national pledge, sign up to the charter, because that page will, as it grows, we'll start to organise it in terms of regions and sectors so that people can see where the nearest school is or where the nearest business might be and so forth. That could become quite a powerful message to our funders, for example, in terms of how widespread we are in growing that wider movement. So definitely encourage groups to pledge to you locally as a first step, nationally, and people might only pledge nationally if there isn't a local group to pledge to. But of course, the pledging has been the underpinning start of where City of Sanctuary began all those years ago in Sheffield, where they thought, anyway, we're going to convince our council that we want to be a city of sanctuaries if we get enough pledges from local organisations, you know, and it's that building of the wave of support where it becomes a moral imperative for the powers that be to say, well, this is what the people want.
Yeah, I just noticed in the chat there was a question about the sort of recommended timeline for an award process. It's always hard to give a specific time frame, and you know, we're all obviously working in a context of COVID when every day the situation is changing and we're kind of how we're working. I often say, for example, in working in the schools context, I recommend that schools kind of commit like an academic year to the process of doing this. Now, some schools may come to us having done a lot of work already and are quite ready to submit an application and want to get awarded. I also sometimes recommend that people work to a target. In terms of like having a date. So sort of saying if a City of Sanctuary group is meeting with an institution that they think is, you know, on its way, sort of saying, okay, let's aim to have you submit an application in 4 or 5 weeks time or 4 or 5 months time, and you can be appraised, and maybe we can have a celebration that ties to some particular local event, or maybe a lot of organizations like to do award celebrations during Refugee Week in June, because that's always just a nice way to do a celebratory event. So I often suggest, you know, try and make a timelines from the start. recognize that sometimes the award process, because it's, in some contexts is dependent on volunteers in the local group, that, the capacity issue will go up and down depending on what those volunteers have going on in their lives. In some places, as some of you know, there are schools of sanctuary coordinators whose job it is to kind of work with schools and move that process along. So sometimes it's a bit easier to create those timelines. I would say just try and make sure, it's good to have some agreed dates though, because it can be very easy for things to drift along. And I think it's nice to have targets like that. And I think, so Jamie has come in with, is there a process for follow-on contact and care with organizations that have received awards? That's a really good point. In terms of official processes, no, we haven't created kind of suggestions or ideas about it, but actually this prompts me to think that maybe that's something we should start capturing a bit more of. I mean, what I say to groups that are working to do awards or have awarded institutions is to say, it's incredibly important to stay in touch. So we always encourage organizations to sign up to our national newsletter, follow us on social media so that we can kind of shout out to them. If your local group does regular newsletters, for example, make sure that you put those institutions in your local newsletters, on the news mailing list, provide good examples of them. Some of you may know, I live in Ripon, North Yorkshire. Our Ripon City of Sanctuary group, we've often will tag, if we see one of our local schools, which has become a school of sanctuary, they've done something good, we share that new information on our local social media stream. So it's about trying to maintain that relationship. I think it is important to mention that we are all made, much of the network is made up of voluntary groups, our voluntary groups, and volunteers move on and things change over time. So sometimes, a relationship, an awarded institution, may have gotten an award a few years ago, and the people that worked with them at that time move on. And so there can be, challenges in maintaining that contact. And that is for one reason I kind of plead that, to work with your regional coordinator and make sure that any contacts that you have or awarded institutions are linked into City Sanctuary UK, so that we can also maintain them on our database and that we can stay in touch. And then also, so should a volunteer who's worked with, helped get an award for, say, a library in your area, but then they've moved on, we can hold on to that documentation so that any future volunteers that come into that the local group will have the background and the context and knowledge and can go on. So that's good.
So would you like me to pick out some more of the questions just so we don't miss them? There's one which is an easy one, and it's from Hadi. Thank you, Hadi. Are there differences between receiving an award and achieving a sanctuary status?
No, right now what we have is sanctuary awards. So Colleen, do you want to come in?
Yes, actually, I just wanted to come in there because the word status is a word that we've tried very hard in City of Sanctuary not to use, because it's a word that Home Office use, in terms of giving people status as people seeking sanctuary. So we try to use the word recognition. So an award is recognising people's an organisation's contribution. Getting status, again, in terms of a whole citywide thing, something that we've also moved away from, and anybody who checks out our last AGM would know that we now have set up a network for local authorities, and some local authorities can be awarded and become councils of sanctuary because of the work that they do. But the award is a recognition and a celebration. It isn't us giving status to anybody. Sometimes, many people in the network still use that word, but we're trying to eliminate it if that doesn't sound too draconian.
Yeah, and I should just, in terms of talking about the follow-on and the, further engagement, one thing I'm not clear that we've presented today, but the awards they have a lifespan. I mean, we say that an award is sort of in place for about 3 years, and the expectation is that after 3 years, there would be a reappraisal process. The reappraisal process, we haven't fully, articulated and defined in detail on the website, and that's something we will work on. I should also mention, though, that, having said that, we are in a COVID age. We do recognize that there are lots of organizations over the last year who may have, say, gotten an award in 2017 and may have been, we would have had an expectation that they would be coming up for re-award in 2020, but we will obviously offer latitude for that. And we're not, our intention isn't to sort of strip the award at some time. I think I see, does Alice, did you want to come in and ask a question? I see you had a question.
Yes, I just can you hear me? I just wanted to find out, as a refugee myself, the equity of racial and refugees go together. And some universities and some schools, private schools, have a problem with the racial part of it all. And how do you balance those things when we are doing the sanctuary award and all that? And also to add on to, is it going to be a sort of, because I'm getting a bit, I've been in City of Sanctuary for a while since it started, but my problem becomes when it ends up now becoming like a prestigious award, where generally it's meant to help. I'm in academia also, but where it's supposed to help the people that are seeking sanctuary, and it becomes every university, private school gets that, and it becomes one of their prestigious awards. Yeah. And yet all the other things that are supposed to be followed within the context of this are not zoomed in. And I think it gives a little bit of cringiness to people who are actually refugees when it comes to that. Because in association with all these things that we're trying to do to make sure that refugees get scholarships and go to school and manage to live independently. But when it becomes a sort of a gentleman's club where people get in with certain prestige and leaves out the real core value of this thing, I think we need to be always revisiting that and looking at what are the actually refugees saying about these things, because most of the time they are always never put into the forefront of how they speak, how they are involved in all, and things are done for them.
This is an incredibly important point, and thank you, Alice, for raising that. It kind of helps actually to segue rather neatly back with some of the slides of the next set of the slides, where we talk about that appraisal process and how we are trying to make sure that the experience and of people with lived experiences is at the center of what we're doing in this award process. So thank you for highlighting that issue. And I think without further ado, then I'll go back with just a few more slides and which talk about some of that and how we can, as groups and as a movement, try and address the issue that you're raising. And then we'll have a little bit more time for some questions and things. I'm also mindful of time, and I know that not everyone will be able to stay too much longer. But so
actually, Alice, you almost answered that question yourself, because it is about our values. While you're getting up the next slide, Sarah, I just thought I'd mention that, if we really, the role of the local group and us as awarders, is to continue to challenge an organisation. So we might give an organisation an award with some recommendations, and we need to monitor that and challenge them and ensure that they're meeting those recommendations. And by awarding an organisation, or indeed Sheffield University have called themselves a University of Sanctuary, so they've given themselves the recognition. But that opens up that conversation where we can challenge Sheffield University and say, if you're a true University of Sanctuary, then do you have a contact point, for example, for sanctuary scholars? And are you really engaging people seeking sanctuary in your decision making, and so on and so forth?
Okay, so I'll just go back and share. We'll pick up where we were before. So we've talked a little bit about the process, and we just did want to kind of spend a few moments talking about the role of the appraisal team and how that works, and what how you pull together an appraisal team. So what we would expect the appraisal team to be working on and to do would be, one, to support and work with that local organization to understand what City of Sanctuary is about, to understand where they can get more information about the experience of people with seeking sanctuary in the UK. We'd expect the appraisal team to be the ones who actually review the application and the portfolios of evidence, and that may or may not include a couple of visits to the institution, in whichever way that can take place. Obviously, pre-COVID, A big part would be about making visits into schools, say, or into other organizations. In the context of COVID, everyone's learning to work virtually and hold some of these meetings online. We'd also expect the appraisal team to be able to help them identify other resources and organizations that they can reach out to learn more. And to also help, the appraisal team is to try and find, good examples that can be shared with other schools or libraries or museums about how they're engaging, and share that ideally with us at City of Sanctuary UK, so that we can include it in newsletters and focus, keep information on our websites, hopefully do events like facilitated conversations like this today. So just to kind of outline some of the expectations for an application and the supporting evidence we'd find in it. And the reason we sort of are trying to provide a little bit of information about that is we recognize that every context and every organization is going to be slightly different. And so we have tried not to say, every school has to go for an award in this particular way, because it doesn't make sense in the context of each place. And that we also hope that appraisal teams take into consideration the size and complexity of an organization. I mean, obviously a cafe that may be supporting local asylum seekers by giving a space for them to meet, or fostering English language tuition, that's going to have perhaps less requirements than a larger business that may have an HR department and different things. What we're mainly encouraging appraisal teams to do is kind of pay attention to the process and look closely at the criteria and see how those criteria can and should be met by that institution. We're looking for creativity. We want institutions to come up with their own ideas for how are they best supporting welcome and showing solidarity. And we also want to make sure that an organization is willing to share and publicize what they do and give examples of their good work. I mean, part of what we're trying to do with this movement building isn't just about recognizing the good work in one institution or organization, but also it's about their willingness to stand up for the principles of Sanctuary, and that they're willing to sort of say in their community, we welcome, we want to be involved, we want to share solidarity. I think, Colleen, did you have put your hand up there for a second? Did you want to come in?
It's okay. I'll come in later. I've made a note.
Okay.
I was going to, but I'll do it later. Thank you.
Sorry. So our expectations for an appraisal team. Obviously we are a loose network of 115 groups. Every town and community, it's going to be slightly different, the makeup of the appraisal team. And we know it's, you have to reflect what you can put together as a team. But ideally, one of the key principles that we ask for is that you engage people seeking sanctuary in that process. We want to make sure that people with lived experience, particularly with those institutions, someone say in the community that's used the local library, so that they can reflect on and say, yeah, this is a place that feels welcoming to me as someone with lived experience. Ideally, a panel should include representatives of the local City of Sanctuary group, maybe someone with experience in that institution, but who is not currently with that institution. So say a librarian could assess another library. So they might understand the professional context in which they're working. Ideally, they would have someone seeking sanctuary. And we understand that there are some communities or places where that's probably not possible, or there might not be a big community of people with lived experience to ask to participate in appraisal panels. And in those instances, we'd encourage you to talk to your regional coordinator or the City of Sanctuary UK team, because we do have a group of sanctuary ambassadors who help us do assessments, sometimes virtually, or depending on where they are, there are lots of creative ways to address that issue. And I should say, obviously, right now in the context of COVID, it's important to say that, ideally, every organization that goes for an award you'd have visits, either, in anticipation of an award submitted, or in the course of this, of an appraisal process. Typically in the past, for example, if I was doing a school one, I and the rest of the appraisal team would go into the school, meet with the teachers, meet with hopefully some students, hopefully also meet with other parts of the faculty team, But, you know, that's just not possible. I think just another point to reiterate, as Colleen's mentioned it before in our discussion, is that, you know, we're not Ofsted, you know, we're not sort of rigidly trying to tick box off things, that we're trying to take an approach that, is this a place that's trying to embed these ideas of welcome, and are looking hard and are genuine partners in it. And I think that is, you know, for those of you who may have done awards in the past, I generally get a sense fairly quickly, you know, when you start to look at it, is this a place that really offers sanctuary and wants to be engaged with this movement? We've said it before, but just to reiterate that their willingness to share and publicize work is important, that we recognize that this is an ongoing approach, that we also expect that sort of whole organizational approach. One of the really important things is, you know, as fantastic as it is to have a particular sanctuary champion in an institution, it's also important to make sure that there is not just one individual or two individuals driving the process to the award, but that there's actually buy-in at sort of all levels of the school. So, you know, in the context of a school, it's not just, you know, they want to make sure that it's not just a passionate teacher, but also a head that's really involved, and that other people across the whole organization are involved. And just a final point, you know, just, I think, you know, I feel always awkward to say you're an expert in anything, but we don't expect that, you know, the appraisal team is necessarily going to be made up of individuals who are educators or librarians or, you know, have worked at a football team, but that the context is what we can assess, or what we do know about is how to try and create welcoming spaces. So just to give you some examples, what would be evidence for awards? You know, here's just a sort of range of things to look at and ask for, you know, kind of look at what types of activities and projects are they doing, you know, and again, that will depend on the school or library or institution. Are they also making sure that they're addressing and thinking about sanctuary in their strategic development? You know, do they have planning documents? Are they incorporating it in the way that their policies are being framed? A lot of our universities of sanctuary have created what they call sanctuary working groups that meet on regular basis, either every other month or quarterly, and it has representatives from across the faculty, the management, student body, where they all meet together and they talk about how things are how they're promoting sanctuary on campus. And those are really effective tools to kind of make sure that it's a whole organizational approach. You know, whoever's providing the evidence, you know, PowerPoint can be one way to do it, photos, videos. I think it's also important to look at if they have communication tools that they use regularly, make sure that they are talking about the fact that they're going for a sanctuary award, or what activities that they are doing to promote sanctuary. So that those are things that we always recommend are included in an application. Testimonies from staff, people explaining why they've gotten involved, either if it's, you know, one individual who's become passionate about this and brought it back to an institution, how they've, you know, and ideally, and most importantly is, you know, if they're working regularly with people seeking sanctuary, what are they saying about the institution? How do they feel about it? How have they been engaged and involved? And if there's any media pieces, if there's been any local press, that's always really a fantastic, another piece of evidence that could be included. So these are things that you can possibly share with organizations if they come to you trying to ask, okay, what do we need to do and how do we evidence it? And, you know, also, again, in the context of COVID, you know, where we're not able to do site visits in the same way or visit or do events together with these awarded institutions, you know, having examples of the evidence in PowerPoint or videos or things is really helpful and powerful for us to be able to kind of make an assessment. Celebrate. So celebrate, this is, you know, as sort of the end of the process, when you give back feedback to an institution, we always make sure that we say, whenever any organization is put in an application, we try and make sure that they get some sort of written documentation about it, you know, even if it's just to say you've done everything fantastically, but kind of pick out things that were particularly good, identify things that they could do better, or share examples from other places. You know, try and make sure to see if there's ways that you can celebrate it in the local media. I've mentioned it a few times. Please make sure you give the feedback to us here at City of Sanctuary UK in order to ensure that our database is accurate and we're up to date. Our funders often ask us, okay, well, how do you know you're having impact, or who are you reaching? So for us to be able to say that, you know, in 2020, despite COVID, we still managed to award over 30 Schools of Sanctuary awards. That's really powerful to say that we're, you know, growing and the movement is getting bigger. You know, we want to celebrate this work in our City of Sanctuary newsletter so that other groups and organizations can be inspired about what happens. Sometimes we have awardees or where there might not be an active City of Sanctuary group. So having a celebration about an awarded institution in a place can help either nurture or grow a group, and it can help feed into that national movement building. And ultimately, hopefully it can link to campaigning. You know, every award celebration is very different. The one pictured here is a local school here in North Yorkshire. The mayor was able to come, some of the families that were involved, the head teachers there. It's a really great representation of what a celebration can be. Unfortunately, obviously with COVID, you know, people are going to have to move some of these online, or some people are postponing award celebrations until it's safe and people are able to do it. But, you know, use that moment of award to have a greater impact. Okay, so we've talked I've mentioned it briefly, the reappraisal, and I know it's getting a little bit late, so I'll kind of try and wrap this up. But again, just to reiterate, we see the award as the start of an ongoing relationship and partnership between local groups and hopefully the awarded institution, and or, you know, with us at the national team. You know, we always encourage continuous engagement, thinking about planning joint activities, next steps, and make sure that if there were recommendations at the time of award, that they are sort of implemented and thought through. And finally, we've mentioned before, in general, we say that the Sanctuary Award lasts for about 3 years, and then we kind of go through a reappraisal process. There's obviously flexibility in that now with COVID impacting organizations' ability to address all those things. But I think the aim is there. Finally, I just wanted to point out what some of the resources that exist, you know, as you kind of go on this journey. We have a web page dedicated to the awards process on our website, which kind of provides all the templates, the timelines, where you can apply for an award online. We have the Streams resource packs, which I've referenced a few times. We have our regional coordinators. In England, we have 4 in England. How many are we in England? We have 4 in England. We have a Scottish coordinator. We have a Welsh coordinator. And so, you know, we are resources. And if you are just starting out on the awards process, please get in touch with us. We are very happy to kind of work with you and help you. For Universities of Sanctuary, because that stream is one that's grown so much and so strongly over the last year, we have a dedicated coordinator for that, and her name's Miriam, and I'm not sure if she's on the call today because I haven't seen, but we can obviously put you in touch with her. Colleen, who's our fantastic comms manager and really spearheaded the development and the growth of the streams work, is obviously a resource as well, and Nawal, who helps with the website and the database. So if you're having issues with either registering someone to do an application or want information about other schools, Nawal can help. We are all here to help, to try to encourage people to think about doing awards and be involved in this. So I've talked quite a bit. I think we're going to kind of open it back up for some more plenary discussions and questions. I'll stop sharing. But, you know, one of the questions is, you know, hopefully this has been a little bit a helpful overview, a start of the process for you. What more can we do to help encourage you and support you in the process of working with Sanctuary Awards?
If I could come in now
Yeah.
and just answer some of the questions that have come up in chat and give you some examples. I wanted to, is there anybody from Norwich here, by the way? Unmute yourself and declare your presence, please, because Norwich have been doing some fantastic awards. As a group, they're all volunteers, there are no paid staff, and they actually set themselves up. All volunteers have a streams responsibility. So there's a very, very effective art stream that's working with arts organisations, libraries and museums, and a very effective school stream of Sanctuary. And they are all led by volunteers. And their whole work is focused around building a community of welcome across Norwich by working with the mainstream and offering awards. And they have an award celebration once a year where they hand out the awards to the different organisations. So they've got museums and cafes, schools, gardens, various mainstream organisations involved. And of course, their university is one of the earliest universities to become a university of sanctuary. And they've grown because they've focused just on that as their work, and volunteers have said, okay, so I'm just responsible for one area of awards, not all of the awards. But also the awarded organisations are then drawn into that grassroots support. So I'm totally gobsmacked by Norwich museums, for example. If you're a Twitter user, definitely follow them. So regularly do they tweet not only about the work they do in terms of engaging people seeking sanctuary, but they are engaging other organisations. So they are running sessions in the museum for the mainstream on how they can become a sanctuary awarded organisation. And they're actually doing the work of the local group as an awarded organisation. So, that's just as an example of maybe coping with the sort of capacity thing. The other question was around, I can't remember the detail of the question, but it was about, it was just to follow up on what Sarah said, is that sometimes an award is given to an organisation in a community where there is no City of Sanctuary group, but it actually leads to the City of Sanctuary group. I gave you the example of Thimblemill Library and Sandwell. But Leicester awarded Journeys Festival some years ago with the first Festival of Sanctuary Award, and that festival delivers also in Plymouth and Manchester. And the festival organisers worked with the Red Cross in Plymouth to set up the Plymouth City of Sanctuary group. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's not Plymouth, it's Portsmouth. I'm so sorry, Nikki, you're on this call, and this is a terribly, I do get them mixed up, and I shouldn't, because I know they're quite different. The examples there anyway, is that the actual awarded organisations, as part of maintaining the integrity of their award, can be involved in supporting the local group to build on streams and awards. And I think the issue raised by Alice and Hera regarding racism is a really important one. And this is where we need the support of the network, because this is something we've been grappling with centrally, is, what do we do when we award an organisation and then they're splashed all over the paper because of their racism or their sexism or something that's not in line with our values, and how do we hold them to account? And I don't know, Sian, if you're still with us, if you wanted to say something on that, but clearly this is one of our challenges. And Alice, you're absolutely right to pick that up. Sexism or racism isn't explicit in our values or principles, but it is implicit there in everything that we do. And we do have a very clear statement around racism on the website and anti-racism resources on the website, which we would refer organisations to. And so, for example, the schools website links to resources for schools around anti-racism. But if anybody's got any contributions on that particular topic, and before I stop, I did put in the chat, please, if everybody would copy and paste the link to the Survey Monkey, because we'd like to get feedback from these sessions. And it's a very short questionnaire. You don't have to answer all questions, but it's an opportunity for you to feedback further and tell us what you want. Somebody's mentioned about quarterly follow-ups where awards do. If you put that in there, we'll definitely, we can do this every 3 months. We can have just an award session, which would be open to the participants to discuss their issues.
I think Hera wants to come in.
Hi.
I'll be really quick. I know it's been. I think we do need to be a little bit more explicit about racism. I understand what you're saying, Colleen. It should be really obvious that a sanctuary movement is anti-racist, but I don't think a lot of people put those two things together. And I've just battled with this a lot in my local work in Lewisham and Greenwich and in Southwark, where people don't explicitly deal with their prejudices and think about their motivations and think about why they want to save you know, a lot of refugees and asylum seekers. So I do think there is an opportunity to be a little bit more explicit and challenge people more directly on this, because it's not obvious to a lot of people and they don't think about these things. So for instance, like I'm trying to work with my groups to do some training around this, you know, and, you know, where people have to really ask those hard questions about themselves and kind of what's going on, and also think and holding people to account around this. And I do think there's something to think about, that evaluation part of the Sanctuary Award, and thinking about how do you evaluate, because obviously, you know, you're never going to get it right. We're all, you know, racist on some level. It's so deeply ingrained in us. And if a school comes out with some sort of accusation of racism, you know, it's more about what you do with it and how you deal with it. And like, I think there's something there in figuring out how do you evaluate people and how they're held to account. So yeah.
So would you suggest, and I'm asking everybody here, that we actually perhaps in our learn criteria quite explicitly say anti-racism would be part of this learning process, that we put that in and build that into all the streams?
I think so. I mean, just thinking about the borough as a sanctuary, the majority of refugees and asylum seekers and any migrant is, you know, someone, a person of color, and they're dealing with racism on top of, you know, being a migrant and being thought of as a foreigner. So it's just, it feels like you can't separate the two. And I don't think a lot of people have at all thought about that side of things.
I would say we really value that comment, and thank you both Hera and Alice for that. One of the things that we hope to do is employ an anti-racism consultant to actually look at all of our work, which includes streams and awards, and how we embed anti-racism more explicitly. And I think it hasn't been done yet, not because we haven't seen it as important, but because our capacity is so stretched. We might look like a large team, but actually we are all part-timers and have other commitments. So it's we're doing our best, but I'm glad that I'm really grateful to you for bringing that up, because it's a very quick fix. We could actually add something more explicit into the generic criteria. We would have to go back to some of the streams where we've developed those criteria in consultation over a long period of time to add that as something explicit. I see Peter wants to come in, and I'll shut up now and let you talk.
Yeah, I think that point is very important, what Hera has just said. Of course, it's not just racism, it's sexism, it's also the other protected characteristics, particularly disability. You know, and I think all of that should be, I know that it's implicit and people would take it that an organisation like ours would embrace those values, but sometimes we do need to be explicit because it's not always obvious to everyone.
Yes, and I have to say, couple of years after awarding a particular university, and I won't name and shame them at this meeting because that's a bit unfair, there was a lot of publicity around them not handling a very, very nasty case of sexism abuse and harassment amongst the students. And the university didn't deal with that very well. And that's when it was at that point, I'm going back a couple of years, that we started to think, you know, how much can we hold these organisations to account? It's, you're right. Anybody else?
I think I wanted to add also onto what Peter said and Hera, being a trustee in this city of sanctuary, that I went to one prestige university, called a college part of the university. And when you look at the things, they tick the boxes of getting an award in every aspect of it. They've got lots of money. They can give scholarships to anybody who is a refugee, but they don't meet those things that you think there's no racial equity in all that they are doing. And you look at it and think, okay, they've got the money. They can push everything they want in through to go in, and they meet everything. They can work with the communities, they can donate, they can do that. But then the real cringe part of it is that somebody like me or somebody who is different doesn't fit in that university at all, in every aspect of it all. And there are what we can call a white elephant in all this. So we need to be looking. I know it's very difficult, like you say, most of the people are part-time, but those questions need to be sort of embedded when we go to colleges or private schools, or schools, not only or even museums, to look at how they also embed things like that. Like, for example, in Reading, to look at the museum, what they're doing with Windrush, not just a corner stand, just to put for the sake of getting a tick box, but things that are embedded within the community that come out. And those questions should continuously be asked. How are you doing for that 1 year when we are evaluating them? How have you been doing? We don't see anybody. We interview students, we interview people like we always do when we want to give the awards. But I think racial is very crucial now with all that has been happening in the world. And it is one of the things that has caused many refugees to have a sort of isolation.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And as Colleen said, we need to really unpack this a lot more and perhaps review those criteria. I think at a minimum, maybe what we can do is start to create some guidance sheets. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Miriam, particularly in the context of talking of universities, but maybe for the appraisal panel, some specific questions that we make sure get answered sort of as part of the appraisal process. Maybe they're not baked in necessarily into the application form because that's generic for every stream, but maybe in particular with universities, because I'm sensing that's a particular issue. I did want to I do see there've been one or two comments in the chat about concerns about trying to that a City of Sanctuary UK is creating an onerous or burdensome process, and I certainly want to address that. We understand this is a network of mostly volunteer groups. We are not actually, our intent isn't to make your lives harder and make this process difficult or hard to engage in, or feel that you have to kind of come back to us at every step. There are two elements. We try to kind of consolidate and create a process to make it easier for some groups to get involved. When I started with City of Sanctuary about 2.5 years ago, there wasn't clear-cut procedures or criteria. And I was noticing a huge variety just within my region about how people were issuing awards, particularly around schools and how things were. And the intent was to try and create processes that were clearer and easier to allow groups to engage with it and help schools engage with it. I appreciate it may that we're asking to be included in getting the documentation. And that's in part to assist groups themselves, I think, because we have had instances where a school will get an award, the people involved who issued the award, they've moved on, the volunteer groups have moved on, and then schools get in touch with us and want to get back involved, and we don't have that documentation. We really don't want it to be onerous, and hopefully it's just a matter of sharing emails. As a regional coordinator, I try and have, be as accessible as possible, and we have regional, setting up regular regional conversations to discuss how to make it easier. But we are trying to walk a path where it's an award that has some substance and meaning to it, and that we, as we were just discussing, the importance of making sure that institutions embrace our values and ethos. And how do we do that? But then simultaneously, assure that quality. So it's a little bit about quality assurance. And, obviously we recognize we want this feedback to help us think through to doing it. But hopefully this is the beginning of a discussion about how we make this a process that isn't too onerous, but is meaningful, because I don't think any of us want institutions to just get fancy certificates from us when they, haven't made a real commitment. I see Hadil has a hand up, and do you want to come in now?
Also, Kate's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, sorry, it's hard for me to see.
It was a while ago, and it was to do with the racism and so on issue, but I don't know whether that's relevant now, so I don't want to kind of backtrack.
Okay. Sorry, I did see Hadil's hand up. Yeah. Go ahead, Hadil.
Can I speak?
Yes, please go.
Yeah. Good morning, all. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation and excellent talk. I just would like to clarify something. Uh, I'm from the Khoja Shia Ithna Ashari community in Birmingham, and Dr. Peter Rooks and his colleagues have actually helped us a lot to achieve the sanctuary status. But due to COVID and the issues with COVID, we have put that plan on shelves. But now, after I attended this good meeting, I'm thinking to restart the process again after COVID the restrictions are over. So does that mean we carry on of what we started in the beginning last year, or does that mean we actually start the new process according to the presentation and to the meeting today?
Well, I mean, I would want you to build on what you've started, and hopefully this, the process isn't too much more onerous. I mean, the process has always been about learning, embedding, and sharing. And so hopefully what you have started with that, we can build on that and take the evidence and the elements of welcome that you're doing. So hopefully it's not too hard. I'm happy to kind of, if you want to set up, I'm not sure, we can set up some time to maybe talk specific about your case and situation, sort of separately, if that would work. Colleen, did you want to say something about in response?
Yes, I just wanted, I mean, I think we're heading perhaps to sort of summarising, and what I'm hearing really from people, we need more discussion. So please go to that SurveyMonkey link and tell us exactly what you want the discussion to focus on, and we will follow up this session because there's so many unanswered questions. But I wanted to just remind people that we're not Ofsted, we're not an awarding body. We are about celebrating and sharing the good practice and encouraging organisations to embed that using our principles and our values. And it's an ongoing conversation. So, we can't possibly pretend to be we're far too small, both at a local and a national level, to be, equivalent to the Inclusion Award or the Quality Assurance Kite Mark bodies. These are huge organisations with massive teams of staff and lots of money. We are not like that. What we're trying to do, and the whole point of this, is build that movement. So it's about that balance between keeping it credible and robust and challenging regarding our values and principles and celebrating the actual good practice that's going on. So we don't want to make us too robust that nobody can jump all our hoops or it becomes a tick boxing. It isn't about tick boxing, it's about our values and principles, and that's really what should be driving all those conversations. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it's finding that balance, because we are not an equivalent to Ofsted. Celebrating and getting an article in the national press that you're a school of sanctuary it opens up minds right across the UK. It's a powerful thing. We don't want to nitpick every detail.
And just to underscore, one of the things which maybe we didn't emphasize enough in this is that creativity and local context and those things, and in the process of trying to do walk this balance of create a process that's easier for institutions to understand and engage with outside the movement, but also help groups feel a little bit more confident about how to do the awards. It is walking a balance. And if just talk to anyone on the team if you're feeling like there's something in particular that's not working for you in the award process, but you're working with an institution that should be celebrated, we'll work that out. But I mean, yes, I'm very mindful of time. A lot of you have been, with us since 10:30, and we're so grateful for that. I hope this has been the start of something useful for you. Awards is probably one of the questions I get asked most as a regional coordinator. How do we do it? How do we get involved? So this is a little bit of a start. We'll share the PowerPoint with you. The recording will be up. We'll save the chat. I'm mindful we might not have answered all the questions in the chat. I'm sorry, it's sometimes a bit hard to check for hands and chat and respond and things. and please keep giving us feedback. You know, Alice, this has been really important about how we, you know, embed these issues. Catherine, thank you. It's really valuable to hear, you know, you're feeling like this might be a bit too onerous. That's not our intent. It's also to help us figure out ways to better help groups. So keep that conversation going with us, you know, either Colleen and I in the context of this, but also your regional person. I don't know if anyone has any other final beautiful pressing points before we're going to close up in a few minutes.
Can I just make that point that I wanted to make earlier on? It just to do with, say, specifically the racism issue. We have had in the past with Swindon City of Sanctuary some workshops delivered by Hope Not Hate, and they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And if somehow, if you know, the National City of Sanctuary ethos.
We're talking to them, yeah.
Right.
I'm writing them.
Okay.
I've been in contact with them already to set up a facilitated conversation about some of these issues.
And whether these workshops could be a reference point for example, schools or whoever, because I think they do school workshops as well.
Yeah.
Because these issues, whether it's racism, sexism, or anything, have to be dealt with in a very expert way in order to teach people, including myself and others who went to these workshops, how to deal with these issues in a non-confrontational way. And those kind of things are invaluable. So whether or not, you know, you can make them a fairly overt reference point within a sort of within the context of making statements about, for example, racism, so that organisations can refer to these and use them if possible, would be fantastic. Because yeah, they're very enlightening, and they're enlightening to people who think that they're okay with all of this too. I think, you know, because
one of the things.
I'm going to say, because racism can appear in very subtle ways, not just the obvious.
We have ongoing work to do for sure, and one of the things that perhaps didn't come out of this presentation that I'd quite like to say is that, you know, reach out to other organisations like Hope Not Hate, especially if you've got a local organiser, or Stand Up to Racism, or Amnesty. Amnesty have a lot of training materials and will go into schools. The Red Cross take training, 5-session training into schools, you know, around migration. So it isn't about us delivering this all by ourselves. It's about building the movement by bringing lots of people into all of this and celebrating together and building those partnerships and networks. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I think we should let you go and let everybody goodbye, or maybe people want to just put their hands up into the corner of their screens. I'm not doing this very well, so that we can get a sense of, you know, our symbol and our connection with each other. The house logo as a goodbye, and reach out to us by email, by the Survey Monkey, and go well and go safe, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.